what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, October 13th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And, of course, it is Friday the 13th. And already the bad luck is hitting. It took us something like 20 minutes to try and establish the Skype connection for our show to do the program today here. And I was over at Down Detector, and apparently Skype is down in a lot of places, a lot of countries all over. So ever since the new update, it just really isn't working, and we're going to have to look for some other kind of a system to connect our little microscopic studio here on the island of Oahu with Round Rock, Texas, and the Republic Broadcasting Network. But we are up, we are live right now. Hopefully we will be able to keep this connection during the program, as the lovely Lady Claire will be with us in hour number 3. And for those of you who are history freaks, the reason Friday the 13th is considered unlucky goes back to the Knights Templar, because it was on a Friday the 13th that King Philip the Fair and the Pope basically came on down on the Knights Templar, disbanding them, burning them at the stake, trying to find their wealth, because King Philip the Fair was hideously in debt to the Knights Templar. They established a lot of what would be considered modern banking, including keeping royalty hopelessly hooked on debt. And they never really found the Templar wealth. Not really sure if it ever really existed. There are some people who think that the Templar wealth is buried in that pit on Oak Island. Maybe. It actually is pretty much the same latitude as the Templars' Navy base in France. They could have just sailed straight across using an octant or a sextant and found their little island where they were going to put things down there. The Templars did know the New World was there. They learned it from the Muslims, who learned it from the Vikings. And as I mentioned on Columbus Day, Columbus' wife was from a Templar family. And that's one of the reasons why there's a Templar cross on the sails of Columbus ships. So enough about the history here. We're going to get into the news. A lot of stuff to talk about today. Apparently, more and more pressure is being brought to bear to actually start looking into what was going on over at the DNC and Debbie Wasserman Schultz. And the scandal is just growing. And Judicial Watch is just doing an amazing job over there, prying loose all the information about the falsified billing, stolen equipment, cybersecurity breaches on Capitol Hill. And Judicial Watch is just moving forward through the courts. They're starting to find judges who are willing to say, yeah, there is something here. And a lot of it seems to center on Imran Awan, his family members, who were on Debbie Wasserman Schultz's payroll even after they had been booted off the Capitol Hill network for unauthorized access. And apparently they made unauthorized access to the congressional server at least 5,400 times. And so there's a lot of pressure building up. And the latest revelation there is that the government maintains a list of IT contractors who have been approved for access to government computer systems. And remember how on the email server scandal, Hillary went to a company that wasn't cleared to be handling classified information. She even violated an executive order signed by her own husband, President Bill Clinton. But as it turns out, Imran Awan and his family were not on that list. And so the question is, why were they even in there at all? Why were they being hired? Who was encouraging their being hired into the Congress? So it's really building up there, and Judicial Watch has finally convinced a federal judge to review unredacted copies of emails between then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and General David Petraeus. And here's where it gets really interesting. Remember last year when Donald Trump was campaigning, if I was the president, you'd be in jail, blah, 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 blah. Well, obviously, Trump has been given the message, you must protect the narcocracy or the whole government's going to come crashing down, because apparently Trump's State Department was trying to argue that information regarding a potential personnel appointment is protected by claim of personal privacy. And this is the third federal court that has turned aside Trump administration efforts to defend Hillary Clinton's email and related information from further review. So Trump is now part of the problem. He's now part of the swamp. The swamp won. And what gets really interesting is going on back to that meeting between Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch on the tarmac, and they had documents about what the conversation was about, and they're totally redacted. They're totally redacted. They're black. President of Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton, during his weekly update, is saying that the documents that they have been given are totally blacked out. And it's important to understand they weren't blacked out by Attorney General Loretta Lynch. They weren't blacked out by James Comey. They weren't blacked out by Barack Obama. They have been blacked out by the Justice Department run by Attorney General Jeff Sessions, an appointee of President Trump. And so more and more it looks like what's behind all of this corruption and crime is so terrible that it will bring down the entire government when it comes on out. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. The Russia collusion story has been one nothing burger after the other, after the other, after the other. They've discovered that the meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and this Russian lawyer was all about the Magnitsky Act, nothing about the campaign. And the latest one now is CNN claims to have done an investigation in which they're claiming Russia used Pokemon Go to meddle in last year's elections. This is not coming from The Onion. This is not satire. This is for real. CNN is saying that Russian actors used the augmented reality game Pokemon Go to sow discord and fuel racial tension among Americans during the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Well, I'm sorry, I remember the campaign speeches, and it was Hillary Clinton who was out there pushing racial division. But I mean, it's getting ridiculous out there. Oh, they use Pokemon Go. And then CNN wonders why nobody is tuning into their broadcasts anymore. So basically, there's an article over here in Veterans News Now saying that when you wade through all the propaganda, when you discard all the hype and the innuendo and the rumor, that basic claim of Russia meddling in the election, there's no proof behind it. And what we have here is a political system and a corporate media that is in the grip of confirmation bias. They're holding it as an article of faith that Russia had to be helping Donald Trump. That's the only possible reason Hillary Clinton would have lost the presidency, because they had vote riggers in every single state, and Hillary is lovable, and everybody loves the liberal platform, and there's just no way that Hillary could have lost the election unless those evil Russians came on in. And in a almost a throwback to the Downing Street memo, they're saying the available intelligence was being fixed to fit a pre-existing policy, a desired outcome. And there's nothing there. All right, we're going to spend a little bit of time on Harvey Weinstein. And yes, I'm enjoying this immensely after the way Hollywood treated me in 1994 for trying to report a murder. I was trying to be a good citizen. I was trying to do the right thing. See something, say something. You've probably heard that expression. And I saw something, and I tried to say something, and mine just evaporated. So yeah, I'm kind of enjoying seeing this whole liberal establishment in Hollywood come crashing on down here. So basically, more and more people are starting to come forward. He's now facing an accusation of rape. And a lot of these people are coming on out and saying they were afraid to speak out before because Weinstein could crush any career he wanted. There's that little good old boys blacklist network, and they protect each other. Doesn't matter if somebody has done something that's illegal, immoral, unethical. They protect each other. We saw the same thing with David Begelman when he was embezzling from his own actors. And when he got caught at it, all of these movie moguls just clustered around him and said, "You won't touch him. You don't dare touch him. We'll take our movies elsewhere. We'll quit. We'll destroy your studios." There was never even an issue of what Begelman had been doing. Was it right, moral, or legal? And, of course, it was immoral, very illegal, unethical. But that doesn't matter. We're protecting the clique, the group, the core. And everybody is hopping onto this thing, and they're all pushing their particular agenda. And Jane Fonda is saying that, yes, she knew what was going on, but she kept silent on Weinstein. And she's out there saying that the ultimate cause of all of this sexual harassment going on in Hollywood, it's male entitlement. It's those evil males. They feel they have a right to assault women. And she's even trying to blame Donald Trump for what Weinstein did. And she's explaining why she didn't speak out before by saying, well, it didn't actually happen directly to her. Now, there's another actor over in Great Britain, Sophie Dix, and apparently she had a very weird encounter with Weinstein. Basically, she went up to his hotel room for what she thought was a meeting to advance her career, and he basically tried to tear her clothes off, and she basically got into the bathroom and locked the door, waited for room service to show up, and then she walked on out. She was so disgusted by the whole affair, she quit acting. She's a screenwriter now. But it's just weird. And here's a good one. Mylene Klass. Okay. Weinstein apparently thought she wanted to have sex with him because so many up-and-coming actresses just naturally do. And yes, that is a problem. We have to draw a line there. There are a lot of women in Hollywood who are willing to make that offer because they think it will help their career. And in many cases, it does. One of the big ugly secrets that Hollywood keeps is just how many bankable female stars at one time worked as escorts. Remember the Hollywood Madam scandal? The scandal were the names that were in that book, not of the customers, but of those women who, because they were very pleasant to the clients, wound up with movie careers. So apparently one of the things Weinstein was trying to do as some of the stuff came on out was to try and get a confidentiality agreement. You did a lot of out-of-court settlements, and part of the deal was you'd sign a confidentiality agreement. You will never tell anybody what it is I did to you. So he was running it as a business. Now, Emma Thompson is out there saying that Harvey Weinstein, he's on the same level as Jimmy Savile, and she says the allegations that have come out so far are just the tip of the iceberg. Now, apparently, Ivana Lowell, who's an heiress to the Guinness fortune, apparently she's now saying Weinstein burst in on her and a friend, demanding a massage, and then just plopped himself spread-eagled on the bed. She wrote about this in her memoirs 7 years ago. Weinstein threatened to sue her over publishing the claims. And there's a growing furor, if you will, over actor Ben Affleck and some of the embarrassing videos that have come on out. And that's a concern because he's the star of this new Justice League movie that's coming on out. He's playing Batman. And this will hit the box office. It really will. That's why Hollywood is so sensitive to scandals with their stars. A really nasty scandal can destroy the bankability of a star, can end a career. And all the money invested in the movie is just going to be gone. And all the other people who signed back-end deals in the movie, they're not going to get the money they were expecting. And it is spreading because apparently Inside Edition correspondent Lisa Guerrero has now come out accusing Steven Seagal of unwanted advances on a movie set. And apparently she was up for the lead female role in his film Fire Down Below, which I hate to admit it, I liked it. It's my favorite Steven Seagal film. But apparently when she turned him down, she got a minor role, and the lead went to Marg Helgenberger instead. So it's just really out there. Now, let's talk about Rose McGowan. Rose McGowan has now come on out and said that, yes, Weinstein forcibly raped her, and apparently there's been a little bit of fallout over that because over at Amazon Studios, their boss, Roy Price, is now on indefinite leave. They haven't fired him, but he's been told not to show up because apparently when McGowan tried to tell him what was going on, he came on back and said, well, the rape story is not credible. There's no proof. And Rose said, I'm the proof. So he's been suspended, and it's just continuing to fall apart. Whoops, hang on. There we go. Sorry about that. Old equipment. So he's been suspended from his job as well. Now, as you know, when Rose McGowan started coming out with this, Twitter suspended her account. And everybody started screaming censorship, cover-up, censorship, so forth and so on. Twitter, responding to the public outcry, have restored her Twitter account. So she's back online there. And again, this is sadly something that's been going on a very long time. Do you remember Alfred Hitchcock's movie, The Birds? The star of that one, Tippi Hedren, is saying that her career ended when she refused Alfred Hitchcock's advances. And yes, he was known to be taking advantage of his positions of power. Meanwhile, Barbara Walters has come on out saying people shouldn't talk about sex scandals or pedophilia in Hollywood. It damages the entire industry. There's a few bad apples, but we should ignore them and just think about protecting the industry, protecting all those stockholders who've invested in the film companies and in the movies. Now, as it turns out, Weinstein's company is falling apart. A fifth member of the board has now resigned, and this was following revelations that the Weinstein company literally was set up to profit from Harvey's sexual harassment settlements, because when they renewed his contract in 2015, they added a clause. Even though Harvey Weinstein was paying these settlements out of his personal wealth, that every time it happened, the Weinstein company was basically going to extract a penalty. Stock, salary, whatever. But they were going to make money every time there was one of these settlements. And I understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to find a way to motivate Harvey to just, stop doing this kind of stuff. But Weinstein had enough money where he could just shrug his shoulders and say, all right, so hit me with a penalty. And it kept on going. So it is very ugly. And there's more coming on out. And I got emails from people saying, well, we may be distracted from something. No, we're going to cover the other stories. We're going to cover more on Las Vegas and the war zones and Trump decertifying the Iran deal in the show here. But again, I want to emphasize, there's two kinds of people in Hollywood. There are the total slimeballs, and then you've got everybody else who are really wonderful people. They want to be there. They want to do a good job. It actually is a really nice work environment because everybody is rooting for this thing, for the production to be good. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And just sort of wrapping up on this Weinstein thing, and we're probably going to be coming back to it many, many times in the coming weeks here because this thing is just blowing up all over. I'm thinking back to that comment made by Barbara Walter about how you shouldn't talk about this because you're hurting the entire industry. No, Barbara, it's the people who are committing the sex assaults and the pedophilia who are harming the entire industry. And it's amazing. Barbara's comment is very similar to comments that were being made when the church pedophilia scandal first began to surface in the spotlight. Oh, it's terrible, but you can't talk about it. You'll hurt the church. And they were trying to blame the reporters, and they were trying to blame anybody who was talking about what was going on. The blame rests on those who are committing these crimes. And again, we're not talking about sex. There's a lot of free sex in Hollywood. It's power. It's wanting to go to bed with the women who normally wouldn't do that sort of thing. And that's what fed Harvey's ego. All right, let's talk about something else here now. Getting on over to the Las Vegas shooting, this is getting weirder and weirder. That security guard, Jesus Campos, who supposedly was shot by Stephen Paddock several minutes before the mass shooting began, which should have alerted hotel security, or according to the guy in the next door room from Australia who said he was shot by one of the police, he was going to be interviewed by Fox News. In fact, he had a whole series of interviews set up, and all of a sudden he's disappeared. Nobody knows where he went. And we should be concerned because there's another story about this 28-year-old woman who was going public on the fact that she was convinced there was more than one shooter, and she supposedly died in her sleep of natural causes, 28 years old. Maybe it was natural causes, or maybe there's a lot of wet work that's getting done to try and keep the lid on this thing here. But even the Mandalay Bay Hotel is now challenging the FBI's conclusions, saying that they're confident that the timeline stated by the FBI is simply not accurate. So even the Mandalay Bay Hotel, even MGM is saying, no, what they're saying just doesn't make any sense. And it really doesn't. They botched this one good. They went to that well of a false flag attack to support the gun grab agenda just one too many times. And in their arrogance, they really were convinced the American people were just going to go along and believe it. But after the Boston Marathon bombing and Sandy Hook and all these others, where there are indications that the official story is not to be believed or trusted, it was reckless to go ahead and try to do it one more time. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the program, Trump went ahead and decertified the 2015 P5+1 deal and basically said that his justification was that Iran was not living up to the spirit of the accord, even though the United Nations nuclear watchdog repeatedly confirmed the country was complying with all of its obligations in the treaty. The U.S. did not. They did not provide sanction relief. They threw more sanctions on there. It's the U.S. that was in violation of the spirit of the deal. But Trump's out there saying, I'm going to get new things put on in there. Now, at this point, he's dropping the whole mess onto the Congress. And he is expecting that Congress is going to want to put more requirements on Iran regarding inspections of their missiles. And if Iran refuses, that'll be followed by more sanctions. Now, we still don't have a reaction from Iran itself, but the reactions from the rest of the world are quite telling. More about that when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about Trump decertifying the nuclear deal. Now, he has not actually pulled the U.S. out of the deal. It's still there. He's going to leave that decision up to Congress. So he can duck the blame because the condemnation is coming in from all over the world here. I mean, Trump basically decertified the deal, said Iran is in violation of the deal, even though the IAEA is saying, no, they have kept all their promises. And on top of that, Trump launched into just this bash of the Iranian leadership, and he slapped more sanctions on the Iranian Republican Guard, which have now been declared a terrorist organization. Talk about pot calling the kettle black here. The European Union has already condemned Donald Trump's decision to decertify the deal. They're saying it is leading to destabilization of the Middle East, which is, of course, what Israel wants. Israel wants the U.S. to go in and smash up Iran the way Israel wanted the United States to go smash up Iraq. Interestingly enough, German Foreign Minister Sigmar Gabriel is saying that this decertification, and especially if Congress does pull the U.S. out of the deal, it's going to distance Europe from Washington and actually drive them closer to Russia and China. And it very well might, because what Trump has just signaled to the world is you cannot do business with the U.S. government. They will not keep their promises. Interestingly enough, in the last few hours of this whole thing, Israel reversed itself. They've been saying, yeah, get rid of the deal, get rid of the deal. Then all of a sudden, Israeli defense experts said, maybe we should keep that deal around. But the credibility of the U.S. government is shot at this point. Not that they had that much left over after Saddam's nuclear weapons and Assad's chemical weapons and, you know, everything that's going on in Libya and Yemen and Syria and Afghanistan. But this was just out there in the open. Everybody looking at it understands it was the U.S. that was in violation of the spirit of the Iran deal. Iran was totally in compliance. And in just decertifying the deal just because he felt like it, he's shown himself to the world as basically acting on gut instinct. And that's a bad quality in a president, especially the guy who's holding the keys to the nuclear weapons. Now, one more time, again, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said, he made a phone call to Rex Tillerson, saying that Tehran is abiding by all commitments in the P5+1 deal. The only person who is saying Iran isn't is Donald Trump, and he doesn't really have an argument. There's nothing he can point to and say, see, Iran is not in compliance with the agreement. He's just concocted this out of thin air. They're violating the spirit of the agreement by not letting us come on in and unilaterally just expand the requirements to include missiles. Now, let's say that you buy a car, which is very much on my mind these days. Claire and I have to get a new car. So we go down to the dealership. We pick out a car, maybe a Subaru or something. And we make an agreement to buy the car. And then all of a sudden, the car dealership comes on back and says, well, actually, we're going to give you a different car that costs a lot more money, and your monthly payments are going to go up because of it. That's basically what Trump just did to Iran. Is saying, you don't get this deal anymore, we're expanding it. It's a new big deal, and you will agree to it. And Iran is probably not going to agree to that. And we're already hearing some tough talk from the Iranian Republican Guards, saying that the U.S. should be concerned about all of these bases they've built around Iran within reach of Iran's ballistic missiles. France was supporting the Iran nuclear deal. So this is going to cause Trump and the U.S. government tremendous political damage, credibility damage. This is going to be haunting U.S. foreign policy for years. Now, according to American writer and former Republican politician David Stockman, who was director of the Office of Management and Budget under President Ronald Reagan, he's saying basically the U.S. government is just concocting this bogus Iranian threat, just like they concocted a bogus Iraqi threat and a bogus Syrian threat, and on and on. It's the same story all over again. The U.S. government wants to invade another one of the countries that Israel really hates, and they're just making stuff up as they go along. fixing the propaganda around the already decided policy. How many more times are we going to sit through this before we're willing to stand up and point the finger at the politicians, at the president, at the corporate media, and saying, you guys are full of it, and we're just not listening to you anymore? And no, you will not get our children to throw into this meat grinder you're setting up over there in Iran. Now, fueling more tensions, the U.S. military has sent troops to the Russian border. They are within 100 miles of the border of Russia's military enclave of Kaliningrad, supposedly to bolster a NATO outpost in Poland. And Russia has come on back with a very gentle reminder that there is an agreement between NATO and Russia limiting military forces on that border, and saying that the U.S. military, again, has unilaterally just decided that they're not going to go along with the agreement. Now, up in Scandinavia, the U.S. is starting to militarize that country. And they built a base in Norway a little less than a year ago. They're starting to build a second one, and they're talking about a third one. It's very obvious we are heading toward a major war that will be fought in Europe, on European soil, as well as other places around the world. It's going to be a new world war to keep the money junkies happy, to try and drag the world back to Bretton Woods, where everybody uses the U.S. dollar for cross-border trade and banking for a small fee, off of which the American empire made a huge, huge profit. But more and more countries are pulling away from using the dollar. And that's why this militarism is starting to escalate. It's now a race to get the war going before the U.S. economy really starts to come apart at the seams. Because without those other countries using U.S. paper dollars and paying interest on that, or trading manufactured goods and agricultural produce for those dollars, there isn't much left to hold up our economy. We have 100 million Americans out of work they won't admit to. The stock market is soaring, but it's all manipulation. They're lying about the rates of inflation. And yes, they can just start printing up money left and right, and that'll put us where Zimbabwe was, where they were walking around with paper notes in their pocket that said $100 trillion. Now, Turkey looks like they're shifting their policy on Syria. And apparently 100 Turkish soldiers and 30 armored vehicles have crossed into Syria, into the Idlib region, for a joint mission with Russia and Iran to monitor a local de-escalation zone and what they politely call pacify the al-Qaeda-linked militants there. So Turkey has now swung away from the U.S. government, and that may be connected to that botched coup d'etat and the fact that the U.S. is still refusing to extradite that cleric that Turkey is convinced is the mastermind. But this looks to be a 180-degree shift in its policy, because they used to back al-Qaeda, and now they're not. They're working with Russia and Iran. Syria is all but over, and it's going to it doesn't matter how the government spins it, doesn't matter how the corporate media reports it, everybody will understand this is a military defeat for the United States of America. And right now, much of the U.S. military is running on this illusion of infallibility. But we're seeing how the U.S. is stuck in Afghanistan, they're stuck in Iraq, they're losing in Syria, they're stuck in Libya, they're stuck in Yemen, and we're hearing all the horror stories about lack of discipline and training on Navy ships and very expensive weapon systems that really just don't seem to work. Now, apparently, Baghdad has launched a Kirkuk operation as the Kurds mobilize. Now, Kirkuk was not originally part of the Kurdish Autonomous Zone, but it was sort of roped in during the Kurdish independence vote. And apparently they were making stink face at each other. And a senior Kurdish official said thousands of heavily armed fighters had been deployed to resist the offensive at any cost. But it looks like at the last second they pulled back to avoid a military confrontation. But it's still an explosive situation, no question about that whatsoever. Now, over in North Korea, they are renewing threats of attacking Guam ahead of this newest joint naval exercise. And again, it's clearly a provocation for the United States and South Korea to be running this exercise right off the coast of North Korea. And the U.S. has sent the Ronald Reagan and the Theodore Roosevelt, and apparently there are 4,500 Marines on the Roosevelt, which means at some point they're planning on putting them on the ground somewhere. And apparently the nuclear-powered submarine Michigan arrived at the South Korean port of Busan on Friday. I saw a photograph of it. It appears to have one of those lockout chambers on the deck for divers to get in and out, or seals to get in and out. Now, here's an interesting story. As you know, there's been a lot of talk about North Korea could do this, North Korea could do that. And there's been a lot of speculation about a possible imp attack and how it could kill 90% of Americans in a year. Bit of an overstatement. It's going to blow a bunch of fuses. Humans are immune to the imp pulse directly. You might feel it in your fillings in your teeth, but that's about it. But oddly enough, despite all this talk about North Korea's imp threat, and of course that would make an excellent false flag, apparently the Department of Defense has decided to defund the congressional committee that had been studying the imp threat since 2001. Now, that's going to raise the hairs on the back of my neck, because when you're out there talking about North Korea's coming with an imp attack, why do you shut down the congressional group that is tasked with looking at a possible imp attack from North Korea? Now, the other day, there was a terrible helicopter crash in Okinawa from a helicopter that had been taking part in some of these military exercises around the region. And they literally came out with this story about how it might have been shot down by North Korea, ignoring the fact that Okinawa is some 800 miles away from the North Korean coastline. And it's sort of like what happened with these two destroyers, the John S. McCain and I think the other one was called the Fitzgerald, where they first came out and said, it's a deliberate attack. It's a deliberate attack. They rammed those cargo and tanker ships into our destroyers. And then it turned out the Navy said, nope, incompetence on the bridge, and they fired a bunch of people. Well, it's just happened again because apparently the U.S. military has now grounded the transport helicopters operating in Japan following that crash in Okinawa. In other words, it's another wonderful product of the U.S. military-industrial complex, and it's developed problems. No, our weapons are perfect. Our helicopters fly with North Korea. Those evil those Russians, the Chinese did it. Turning to the economic news, Putin is promising to create a better environment for foreign business in Russia. Improved conditions for foreign companies working in Russia, including removing of obstacles and reforming the legal system. This is a very smart thing for Putin to do, because right now, foreign companies operating inside the United States of America are very worried about whether their home country is going to get hit with sanctions and all of their assets in the United States frozen. And so Putin just basically rolled out the red carpet and said, you can come on in here and set up your business and you don't have to deal with the possibility that the U.S. government is just going to come in and steal all your stuff. So that was a very, very smart thing for him to do. Apparently, China has launched a new yuan ruble payment mechanism. This is another major blow to the U.S. dollar's global hegemony. And we're going to see more war talk now. China's bad. Russia's bad. We got to go after those people. So basically, it's a new financial transaction system. It rivals the U.S. SWIFT interbank payment system. And there are more and more of these parallel systems being set on up because everybody who's dependent on the U.S. SWIFT system is vulnerable to sanctions or other manipulations. And that's why all these other organizations are setting up their own systems, whether it's BRICS, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and now Russia and China. So we're getting close to a major upset here. And I'm very, very concerned that Washington, D.C. is, in fact, desperate to get a major war going. Because if the economy tanks and they don't have a war to blame it on, if they don't have an enemy to blame it on, the American people are going to stand up and point the finger of blame for a destroyed economy where it richly, rightly deserves to go. Wall Street and the enablers in Washington, D.C. And that's why they really need a war. It's not us. It's the Russians. It's the Chinese. We did everything right. It's those. Go hate them. Go hate them. Don't hate us. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And getting on over to Europe. Apparently, Jean-Claude Juncker is starting to panic over this issue of Catalonia independence, concerned that it could trigger the dissolution of the entire European Union. Because Catalonia is not the only region that wants to break away. You've got Bavaria, you've got all these different areas. Something 6 or 7 different regions inside Europe are now all talking about independence referendums. And he's now admitting that, yes, the EU itself could start coming apart. And I think for most Europeans, that would actually be a pretty good thing. The European Union was sold as a free trade, free travel zone. That was it. And over time, Brussels has grabbed more and more authority to itself. The European people are basically slaves to the European Central Bank, just another private central bank, creating the public currency out of thin air and loaning it into circulation at interest. The refugee disaster has really angered a lot of people of Europe who feel that their culture and their heritage is being sacrificed on the altar of tolerance and diversity and multiculturalism. And they want their nation back. They want their culture back. It's what they know. It's what they've grown up with. And they're very angry at all these people pouring in from Africa or the Middle East who are coming on in and saying, well, you're all going to have to live the way we did in the home country. Well, if things were so good in the home country, why did you leave? And now, of course, the Europeans are seeing how there's clearly a real possibility of a new world war fought on their soil. And they remember the last one. If you travel around Europe, you're going to see the scars of the Second World War. They have not gone away. For Americans, it's kind of an abstraction. The last war we had on our soil was the Civil War, and that's pretty much been erased. And now, of course, you have the social justice warriors are out there trying to shut down the last of the monuments, memorials, and battlefields. Oh, forget there was ever a Confederacy. Forget there was a Civil War. We've got a new war. It's going to be fun. I remember this one line out of the movie Hot Shots Part 2 where there's this guy with a big gun. He says, war, it's fantastic. Now, Rachel Johnson has launched a huge attack on the Brexiteers, saying basically the government should just ignore the will of the people. And Rachel, I would be very careful of statements like that, because that kind of an attitude is what got Charles I into trouble. And I think that big wooden block is still over there at the tower. We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're getting a follow-up story about this security guard who basically bailed on a whole bunch of interviews, including one on Fox News that was very heavily promoted. And Fox is now very upset. This guy is nowhere to be found. And now Fox News is starting to admit there are some inconsistencies in that official story. So this one is really falling apart. And for Fox News to be reporting on that, I'm going to have to take back some of the bad things I said about them. Not all of them, but most. Getting on back to Europe and immigration, as you know, Angela Merkel, in order to form her new coalition government following the very poor showing in the German elections, she's done this 180 U-turn and is now saying that it's okay for Germany to control where the migrants are going to be inside Germany. And it's just been announced, migrants coming to Germany will not be allowed to settle in the city of Salzgitter, Lower Saxony, and they're probably going to add others to the list because of all these problems they've had with the rapes and the assaults and the crime and everything else that's going on out there. I saw a story, in fact, it's up at the website, where apparently in Britain, this young lady literally got sexually assaulted 3 times by 3 separate men. They caught the perpetrators on security cameras. So it's amazing. It's amazing. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we seem to have a bad cable here today. As I mentioned at the top of the show, the origin of Friday the 13th is King Philip V's pogrom, if you will, against the Knights Templar. And so there's this interesting little story, and this is out of madnesshub.com. And apparently, over in Great Britain, there was this lady that was making a business selling coffee mugs. And she had gotten into trouble before because she makes coffee mugs for reenactors. And sometimes the mugs have symbols on them that are a little bit questionable. But they let her off with a warrant. Now she's been completely banned because she was selling coffee mugs with the emblems of the Knights Templar on them. And she was told she was banned because the Knights Templar are offensive to Muslims. Well, in this day and age, anything that you do is going to be offensive to somebody. When I'm talking on this show, there are people out there who are very offended by some of the things I say. Be offended. I don't care. But here is the problem and the hypocrisy. They're going to whoop on this 56-year-old woman over the Knights Templar coffee mugs because the Knights Templar, they were there killing the Muslims over there in the Holy Lands. Actually, they were digging underneath the Temple Mount, but that's a side issue. Here's the point. The Knights Templar were working for the church, which declared the crusade. Why aren't they moving to ban crucifixes and the regalia of the Catholic Church if it's offensive to Muslims? Because the Knights Templar, there weren't that many of them compared to the regular soldiers who went on over there to slaughter the Saracens in exchange for an expiation of their sins. Okay, let's see. We have a couple of calls on the line. James in St. Thomas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I'm speaking to you for a while.
Well, it sounds like we've got kind of a flaky phone connection, probably the aftermath of the hurricane.
Yeah, oh my God, that hurricane was awful. The next day when we got up, there was nothing.
Can you put your mouth a little closer to the mouthpiece and see if we can get a clearer signal? Oh boy, I'm having a real hard time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll call you back. I'll try to get a better connection.
All right, thank you very much, and we'll wait for that call. Just going to switch over to Don in Iowa. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, yeah, this you're right about this the story falling apart on the Las Vegas. It's like the mainstream media. They're trying to say, "Hey, we want to go along with what the official story is," but you're not. There is no official story, right? What can they do? They can't go along with. They don't know what the hell they're supposed to say. They know they're not going to tell the truth, but they don't know what to do next.
Well, the official story keeps changing all the time, and you've got, all these people who were down there on the ground who were there saying that they were being shot at from multiple directions. Apparently, Mike Adams did an acoustical analysis that said there were multiple shooting locations. There are some people who think that the Sky Towers next to the venue was the location of one of the shooters. And the fact that the FBI confiscated all the cell phones and devices of everybody at the concert and then erased all the emails and videos and pictures before giving them back, that's really got a lot of people wondering what the heck is going on here.
I didn't know the FBI did all that.
Yeah, they did. That came out earlier in the week.
Well, yeah, you can hear, even if you just listen to the tape, the audio tape, you can clearly hear there's two totally different guns going off at the same time, and they're probably both automatic fire too.
Well, they may have been automatic, they may have been bump stock, it's almost irrelevant, but to me, the fact that there were two windows broken out on the 32nd floor tells us there was a second shooter. It doesn't make sense that Paddock would have two windows broken out in two different rooms and be running back and forth. Once he started shooting, he'd just keep on shooting. He didn't need that second window. Somebody else did.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like I said, the mainstream news outlets, they don't know what the hell to say. I mean, even at least at Sandy Hook, they had one story and they kind of stuck to it, and they're still kind of sticking to it, even though a lot of people don't believe it. And the same thing with a lot of other things that went on. But here, they can't possibly.
Yeah, they don't know what they're supposed to say. They'll come out and commit to a story, and then all of a sudden, the security guard is a good example. I mean, originally they said that he was shot through the door by Stephen Paddock, following the shooting, and then they had to change that and say that he was actually shot several minutes before the mass shooting into the crowd, which raises the question of why hotel security wasn't alerted to this. And again, we have the gentleman from Australia who was in the room next door saying the police accidentally shot this security guard. So, I mean, it's just all over the place. And we've had so many of these. Again, the safe, wise, prudent assumption is this is another government fake. The burden of proof is on the government.
I guess we'll just have to wait for in a little while, hopefully. But I wonder about this whole Harvey Weinstein.
Mm-hmm.
How did this come up all of a sudden? Maybe this was just a diversion so they wouldn't have to face the Las Vegas news.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, if they did, it's spreading completely out of control. Apparently, Oliver Stone is the latest person to be accused of sexual misbehavior. So this really is going to cause a huge ripple effect, and yes, it's going to damage the industry. And again, the fault is not with those of us who are reporting on the stories. The fault is with those who actually behave this way. And yeah, so that's where we are on that.
But anyway,
but we're not giving up on the Vegas
thing. We're just going to have to wait. We're just going to have to wait. It'll probably be a month before some kind of something happens that's believable. We can figure out what happened. I'll talk to you later, Mike.
All right, you got it here. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Las Vegas is over. It was a government fake. If somebody has proof to the contrary, fine. I'm willing to look at it and give it due consideration. But at this point, that chapter is closed. Another false flag gun grabber stunt here. Apparently, we're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And apparently, James in St. Thomas is back on the line. James, are you there? James, are you on the line? Okay.
Can you hear me?
I hear you. Sounds a lot better, a lot more clear.
Yeah, I had to get rid of the AT&T phone I'm using, the Sprint. So after the hurricane, I went and I got 5 phones. And luckily, I was able to get your show. I felt totally out of touch, not being able to hear Michael Rivero on a daily basis. So anyway, I survived 2 Category 5 hurricanes. These hurricanes had at least 185 to 200 miles wind per hour.
Yes.
So the day after the first one, which was Irma, when you were able to come outside, Mike, you didn't want to see your surroundings. Everything was down. People were homeless.
Yes.
Telephone lines was down. Poles was down. Trees that was 500 years old were twisted up like a piece of paper. You know, this hurricane, unlike any other hurricane, did not leave any water on the ground. No grass, no leaves on the trees, nothing. So the island is still brown. Look like it wants to make a comeback. But this was not a hurricane that was ordained by God. This one had to be a man-made one. So I hope you don't do this ever. This thing was dangerous. I had to go in the system to get away from this thing and hope that the water level did not rise too much and drown me in the thing. You understand?
Well, I'm glad you survived. You know, you and I are going to disagree on just the origin of the hurricane, but, you know, there are monster hurricanes throughout history. And I've been through 2 hurricanes myself, including the Aiea. They weren't Category 5, but it was still pretty intense.
Yeah. This thing even take the paint off the building, broke up steel and concrete buildings, you know? It did the impossible. And you see big bulldozers up in trees and boats and stuff like that packed up perfectly in a parking lot thousands of feet away from the ocean.
Is any assistance getting into you? Is any assistance or aid getting to you?
Yeah, they have they have the FEMA people doing a good job. You have a lot of U.S. Marines, you have soldiers helping out. So they've been doing an excellent job with the security, and, you know, thank the President Trump for, you know, giving us the fullest assistance of the U.S. government, and he came here, he met with the governor, and, you know, reassured him that they're 100% to, you know, make sure that the islands get back on their feet. So we are very thankful to the United States of America for being not only the greatest country on the planet of the earth, but for, you know, who stand up for the citizens and does what it does best. There are other islands around here that got devastated, and they ain't getting no help from nobody, not even Britain and all those other things. So, you know, we have to be thankful for America and, you know, the great country that it is and looking out for its citizens. And, of course, you know, for a good person like you, Mike, for keeping the airwaves open and talking the truth and making people, you know, realize that information is the key. So when I get a chance, when everything gets back up, I'm going to make sure I make a donation to Republic Broadcasting Station, okay, in your name.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate that. And I know it's going to be a long, long process to rebuild, but I'm sure you're going to be able to do it. You know, the plant life will come back. And, you know, a few years down the road, it'll be a dark memory, but it will be just a memory, like the people who survived in Hurricane Katrina. So, James, thank you very much for the phone call. Thank you for the information that you've given us. Thank you for the kind words. And we're going to let you go here and switch over to Craig in Louisiana. Aloha, Craig. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. The security guard with Las Vegas, this guy named Scott Bensack, he has somebody he knows at the hotel, and they sent him a screenshot of Jesus Campos' employment records, and he was just been employed just recently, you know, like within the last month. and the person that put him in the system was the CEO of the company. And the CEO also dumped 85% of his stock within like the last 3 weeks before the shooting. And he did some some 1 week, some the next, and then following the last week. But anyway, and not only him, some other high officers in the company all dumped the stock right before the shooting.
You're talking about the security company or the hotel? Because we know that the hotel owners were dumping a lot of stock.
Mandalay Bay, yeah.
Yeah.
I think his name is Murray, something like that. But he was the one that actually put the guy in the system. And you can look this guy up. His name's Scott Binsack, Binsack, on the internet and on YouTube. And he has pictures of everything. The records, pretty convincing.
Well, here's the interesting aspect of this. Okay, in Nevada, it is a state law that anybody working as a security guard, whether armed or unarmed, must be registered with the state of Nevada, and this Jesus apparently wasn't. So there's another question mark hanging over this situation. Just wild idea, was he one of the perpetrators, and he got accidentally shot, like the Australian gentleman said, and couldn't get out?
Well, that's what... That's kind of leaning is that he's actually the hitman that took out Paddock and brought up all the stuff in the service elevator and actually presented the room to look like it. That's just one of the ideas floating around out there. I heard, but because he's a mystery, he's a ghost guy.
Well, he sure is now. I mean, he sure is now. He was set up for all these media interviews, and now nobody can find him. He's just disappeared.
Right.
Okay.
And he probably found out that they had found he'd been outed, and he probably found out that and took off. And
or maybe the people he was really working for got really, really nervous about him being on TV and decided that they needed to sort of contain that. Maybe with his interviews, he was now a live liability, and live liabilities don't stay live very, very long. Craig, we're going to let you go here. We're getting close to a commercial break, and we're going to go to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, the one thing I got a problem with the not kneeling or kneeling for the flag is, people need to remember this is a double-edged sword, because they'll use this to, like they put the yellow ribbons on the trees in Iraq, and, if you question, you're not patriotic or, you're against the troops. So you got to be very careful, when it comes to, just bending over for Uncle Sam in general. You know what I mean?
Well, I understand that, but you see, to me, the flag is a symbol of our entire country, including 300+ million American citizens. And I stand for the anthem. I'll face the flag, not because I'm supporting the U.S. government, but because I hold a vision in my mind that the United States will one day become or return to the nation that I knew as a child. And so I definitely disagree. When those football players are disrespecting the flag, they're disrespecting all of us. And the issue is now dying down. The NFL is now basically taking a hard line. Apparently one of the NFL owners is now being sued over this whole thing. So it's really turned into an ugly, ugly situation. And I think probably a lot of people are going to be very happy if it just goes away. And so will I. It's run its course.
Yeah, I'm for standing for the flag. I mean, it's a disrespectful thing, but I'm just saying there is elements in our, in our government that use that, like during, when they roll out the big flag on the football field and they bring out militarism. You know what I mean? That there's elements in there that will put you down if you don't follow their agenda. You know what I mean?
Oh no, I agree with that. And by the way, holding that flag flat is not proper flag etiquette. There's the irony in all of that situation. Dustin, we're going to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, we have noted there has been a major, almost seismic shift in education in this country going over the last several years. We certainly know down in the lower grades, Common Core has really raised a generation of people who are being taught to simply respect authority, memorize what they're told, and repeat it. They're not being taught how to think, certainly not how to think critically, analyze. They're not taught logic. But apparently in the higher education, colleges and universities, they're being taken over by the radical left. And we're seeing the professors at these universities encouraging Antifa violence and would-be communist revolutionaries. And it's outrageous, and it's all the more insulting when you realize the kids in these classes, for the most part, they've had to take out student loans. And they're there to get an education, not an indoctrination. To give you a few examples, there was an instructor at Clemson University, and apparently was outed by College Reform for volunteering his graphic design skills to help a local Antifa chapter that openly promoted violence on campus. There was that other professor we talked about, I think it was last week, saying that, violence in service to the promotion of progressive causes is perfectly acceptable. And do you realize how anti-democratic this all is? What they're basically saying is, if the voters won't go along with what we want, then we'll just achieve it through violence. And another notable member of Clemson, Assistant Professor Bart Kniesenberg, basically wrote a Facebook post, "All Republicans are racist scum." Now, when I was an adjunct professor, I was never a full professor. When I was an adjunct professor at the University of Hawaii, there was a strict code of conduct and behavior. And because those kids in my class were there to learn computer animation and visual effects, that's all I ever talked about. Because that's what those kids were there for. That's what they were paying for. When you get up there and you start promoting violence and trying to recruit these kids into your agenda, you're cheating them. You're shortchanging them. Apparently, Professor at Drexel University was put on leave after blaming the Las Vegas massacre on the white patriarchy. George, let me see if I can say this correctly, Cicherillo Maher basically posted all these tweets saying it was all the fault of white supremacy. Now, this is the same professor who last December tweeted his desire for the deaths of white people. That was basically it, where he wants all the white people to be gone. And it sounds to me like this guy is the racist. And it's see, all I want for Christmas is white genocide. Director of First Peoples Multicultural Advising Services at Evergreen University, Rashida Love, demanded a day without white people at the Oregon Institution. So you tell me who the real racists are. It's the radical left that are out there saying that this should be done because they're white. This should be done because they're white. When did white people become an acceptable target for this kind of activism? It is disgusting. I absolutely do not agree with it. I would never allow a child of mine to go to a university or a college where this kind of stuff was being fed them. That violence is good, that this or that race is bad and ought to be killed. It's a very dangerous precedent. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go right back to the telephones. Craig in Seattle. Aloha, Craig. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. I was wondering if you could touch base on Charlotte Iserby, who warned us years ago about this. refresh everybody's mind about this, because there was some time has passed that she warned us that Reagan signed treaties to bring the Soviet-style schooling to the American education system. Is this true? And then she was fired by the Reagan administration for blowing the whistle?
I am not really familiar with Charlotte or her story, this being back again during the Reagan years. But the idea of controlling the education system to control the minds of the people goes way, way back. I mean, modern education goes all the way back to what's called the Prussian model. And prior to that, basically, children were raised by the parents. They were apprenticed out to learn a skill. And Prussia decided they were going to have a public school system in order to train the kids and raise the kids to be loyal to the state, to be useful to the state. Here in the United States of America, Andrew Carnegie, one of the so-called benevolent institutions he founded was the Carnegie Education Institute. And their agenda was that the public should not be taught anything more than they needed to do their jobs and fill out paperwork. And anything more was just going to confuse them. You used to see the same mindset in the antebellum plantation owners, where they said, slaves ought not to be taught to read or write. It'll just fill their head with all kinds of troublesome thoughts. So it's been an ongoing, continuous process, and it sort of culminated with Common Core, where the education system isn't really about education, it's about indoctrination. And yes, it was going on when I was a kid. I remember how we were brainwashed into hating the Soviet Union and just being afraid of them. They were going to do all these terrible things, none of which ever actually happened. And I remember the first time I actually met somebody from the Soviet Union, and wow, this is a nice person. Didn't try and rip my head off, didn't try and indoctrinate me. We were talking about computer animation, in fact. And so it's always been that process, and local control of the curriculum has been a political hot potato for a lot of years. When the Black Panthers first started, before they were militantized by the FBI, their original agenda was guaranteed breakfasts for the ghetto children so that they would go to school, with everything they needed for their brains to work properly. And local control of the curriculum, because communities know best what the children should be learning in order to serve that community. And so that's always been a huge, huge fight, because the federal control of the curriculum means you have kids who are living in farming country who are having to learn about farming outside the school. Are you still there?
No,
okay.
No, I am. I think I didn't want to be rude and pop in there, and always, as all your other callers, they just love your show, and you're just loaded with information. I'm wondering if you knew about it, and I've heard it before, and I know she was actually fired for blowing the whistle, evidently, and she had warned us in her last interview. She's quite older now. I think if she's still around, she's in her 90s, late 80s, earlier 90s, and warning about Common Core and all these, areas of small schooling, private schooling coming up, as you can see, popping up all over the place. It's interesting.
Well, definitely, we're definitely seeing, going on back to this article about all these professors, very clearly they're pushing a communistic agenda onto those college kids, and an agenda of achieving, their goals with violence. They're literally sowing the seeds of a communist revolution in this country. And so, again, they're cheating the kids, because that's not what the kids took out these student loans to be taught.
Absolutely. I'm seeing that here in Seattle. It's amazing. And it's such a small little, they call it a city. It's a town with a couple of big buildings and a bunch of small mines running it. It's amazing. So.
Yeah, and some of the worst traffic in the United States. I remember trying to get around Seattle was very frustrating when we lived there. Anyway, listen, Craig, we're going to let you...
Get out to...
What?
That's okay. No, that's fine. I was going to make a comment about North Bend, but that's fine. That's where I used to live. It takes a long time to get out there, even longer now. So
I loved North Bend. I loved North Bend. I really did. Wonderful people.
So do I.
Wonderful people.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Farming people. Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And the other day, somebody called into the radio show. We were talking about Val Kilmer, and I'm a big fan of Thunderheart, which I think was his best film. And they said, well, you know, where did he get to? And so I did a little digging, and it turned out that he suffered and beat a serious throat cancer. And if you go to the Internet Movie Database, he's back at work. So he's going to be seen again, and good for Val, and you know, I hope he does well. Now then, getting on to the right to keep and bear arms, and of course the gun grabbers are out there saying we've got to ban the bump stocks, and immediately there's all these videos surfacing all over YouTube showing how you can rapid fire a semi-auto without a bump stock, with simple little improvised devices, strings, metal rings, rubber bands. So again, it's a pointless law. But we've got to do something to stop another Las Vegas. But even Dianne Feinstein is saying gun laws wouldn't have stopped what happened in Las Vegas. Now, whether she means that's because criminals don't pay attention to the gun laws, or because she knows it's a false flag and the people doing false flags don't obey the gun laws. But apparently over in Detroit, there's been another case where there was an attempted robbery, and the intended victim pulled out his concealed carry gun, and the incident was caught on high-definition surveillance video. And apparently Sanchez Quinn attempted to rob two men at gunpoint outside a supermarket, and what Quinn didn't know was one of them had a concealed gun, who took down Quinn, shooting him multiple times. And here's a reality that everybody needs to understand. At the moment a crime is being committed, there are only two parties present, the perpetrator and the victim. The police are not there. The police are never there when the crime is actually being committed. They'll show up afterwards in their nice little uniforms in their cars and, you know, strut around like they're relevant to what's gone down. But if you really want to stop crime, you allow law-abiding citizens to be armed. And everywhere that law-abiding citizens are allowed to be armed, crime does go down. There is a town in Georgia, Kennewick, and several years ago they passed an ordinance in the town saying every home had to have a gun. And crime dropped by 80%. Meanwhile, over in Baltimore, which has very strict gun control, they've now surpassed New York and Chicago as the murder capital of the United States with 278 homicides. Now, when the gun grabbers started talking about banning bump stocks, the NRA initially came on out and said, yeah, we might be okay with it. But apparently they faced a huge backlash from their members, including threats of ending support. And so now the NRA has retracted and said the right to keep and bear arms is absolute. And if you go back to the United States versus Mitchell case, the judges ruled the Second Amendment reserves to the American people the same weapons carried by the uniformed services. Now, common sense has to tell you that law-abiding citizens should be allowed to have weapons that are equal, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals. And don't forget, the criminals are getting military-style weapons from the United States government through the Fast and Furious program. And many of them have come back into the United States of America from the Mexican cartels, and they've been used to kill Americans. Now, here's a very bizarre story, and again, it shows the leftist mindset. And basically, it all started where there was a student at this university in Madison, Wisconsin, who said a campus rape could have been prevented by concealed carry. And protesters just came on out and just said, that's ridiculous. You can't allow people to carry guns. See, to a gun grabber, to a liberal, a woman lying raped and strangled with her own pantyhose in an alley is somehow superior and preferable to that same woman telling the cops how her attacker got shot. That's their thinking. They don't care if people are going to be killed, robbed, raped, as long as they get the guns. Because guns are bad. The guns are bad. We got to get rid of the guns. Well, if guns are so bad, why are we sending so many of them to Israel or the Mexican drug cartels? It's not guns are bad. It's guns in the hands of the law-abiding Americans are bad, because the reason for that Second Amendment is to arm the American people to deter abusive government. Nobody wants a revolution or a civil war in this country. The Second Amendment is all about giving the government a reason to stay within its constitutional boundaries. And the very best use of a gun is when you don't have to pull that trigger. And I've been through that experience myself, where I used a firearm to chase a crook out of my home. And I was very lucky I didn't have to pull the trigger. And by the way, I did call the police to report, and the cops never showed up. They're not interested on reporting when law-abiding citizens defend their homes and property and lives with a legally owned firearm. They don't want that statistic to get on out, but it got out anyway. Every year in the United States, over 1.5 million crimes are thwarted by citizens with legally owned firearms. That's the reality. The cops can't compete. That's what they're scared of. If you have an armed population, then there's no reason for the police to be around. Because as I said before, they're not going to be there when the crime's committed. And they're not very good at actually finding criminals. Basically, if you go into a part of your town where you're not known, and you hold up a convenience store, you've got less than a 1 in 30 chance of ever being talked to by the police. That's the current statistic. It's amazing here. Now then, let's talk a little bit about computers. The other day, a lot of people had raised eyebrows over the Internal Revenue Service awarding a no-bid contract for $7.2 million to Equifax to verify the identities of taxpayers. And everybody said, how can you go to Equifax with all of these ongoing breaches? And as you know, the Equifax website actually got hacked earlier this week and was directing people to a phony Flash update site. And first of all, Flash is going away. You shouldn't be using it. You shouldn't update it. It's a horrible security hole. But apparently the IRS has now suspended that deal, thinking that maybe Equifax isn't really a trustworthy, reliable company. Now, getting on back to our caller from St. Thomas, apparently the FBI is starting to investigate the mishandling of FEMA supplies down in Puerto Rico. And they're looking at this issue of corrupt local officials withholding or mishandling crucial supplies, possibly selling them on the black market. You know, politicians, that's how politicians think. Goes with the job. This story really bothered me. It's over at 12160. And apparently there is a push for a change in the law in Great Britain that will lower the age of consent to 12 years old. Why? What are they thinking over there that they're going to do that? Is the whole country turning into Jimmy Savile clones? All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Nico in Southern California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. So, called to talk about the Boy Scouts with, bringing on girls.
Yes.
Although I did hear an interesting thing from Stefan Molyneux regarding the Second Amendment.
Yes.
He said that, if you want to be anti-gun, you're not anti-gun. Because if you want to come and take all the guns, then it's going to require police with guns to come and take all of those guns. Therefore, you are for guns, and you're for a centralization of guns. And, you're for centralization of guns to the government, who are oh so pure. So, an interesting argument there.
Okay.
So,
you know, I think this
this
idea with the Boy Scouts, it's politically correct, but like I said, the first pregnancy that happens, the whole thing's going to blow up in their face.
Well, there's that incident, and I think people are aware of that. I'm an Eagle Scout.
Okay.
My father is an Eagle Scout. I was in the Boy Scouts for many years. I know there's some things that have happened. Never heard of anything.
Okay, you're fading in and out. Can you talk a little closer to the microphone, please? Hello?
Certainly I can. Yes. So
okay.
Let me fix my phone here.
Okay.
It'll take 1 second.
All right. Well, while you're working on the phone...
that should be a lot better, Mike. How's that?
That's much better. Before you continue, though, somebody called on in to correct me. It's Kennesaw, Georgia, where they had the ordinance saying you had to have a gun. Kennewick is up in Washington, but, Ken here, Ken there, so forth and so on. All right, Nico, please continue.
Yes, more to the point. I'll make this brief. I don't mean to take so much time. So basically the point is, aside from any incidents happening, I think it's very important for young men to have an all-male structured environment. I benefited greatly. I actually work in an all-male environment, and I have a team under me. Mm-hmm. And, I work in construction management, and I can tell you that the skills that I gained in Boy Scouts with an all-male environment has made me able to kind of lead a bunch of, very manly men doing manly things. And okay. I think that if you're going to have women around, it's going to distract people in the hormonal phase. You can't treat women like you treat men, and I think that this idea that, we're all the same, it's just bunk. And I'm sorry, but that's just my opinion, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, I'm agreeing with you. I think it's a huge mistake, if for no other consideration, that, boys and girls at that age, the hormones are raging out of control. This is a disaster waiting to happen. Nico, we're going to let you go. Take a break for commercials. Back after just a few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently they've had yet another press conference in Las Vegas, at which they said an infinite deal of nothing, and said it very well. But 2 points are interesting. Apparently, Sheriff Lombardo was looking very shaken and on the defensive, and he's telling reporters he's not trying to be subversive in these previous statements he made. Apparently he's being challenged on the constantly changing story. The other significant development is that as of this press conference, only reporters from the recognized corporate media are being allowed in. Reporters from the independent media are now being blocked. So you think about that one for a little bit. Now, you remember that story about how this Michigan mother went to jail after refusing to comply with the court order to vaccinate her 9-year-old son. Well, apparently the court has now basically taken away primary custody of the boy. They'd been through a divorce. She had primary custody. Now it's joint custody with the child's father, which means now they'll be going after the father to get that needle stuck in the kid's arm. Because it's money. It's more money. We can't let anybody doubt the vaccinations. Now, if you've seen any movies about the Middle Ages, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you know about the plague. The pneumonic plague killed at least 50 million people in the Middle Ages. They're not really sure. And everyone thinks it's something from the medieval period. It's back. There's a major outbreak of it now in Madagascar. There was one documented case here in the United States of America brought in by a refugee. And so once again, we have this complete disregard for human health and safety in furtherance of a particular agenda. More bad news for Tesla. They're having to recall 11,000 Model X SUVs for an issue with the back seat, where they might not properly lock into place, which means when the brakes get hit, the seats fly forward. And where were the engineers on this one? I mean, some of the more complex parts of the car and the battery, the new high-tech stuff, yeah, maybe. But a seat lock is something that's been around for so long. How can you not do the right job on that one? Interesting little story here. This one's coming out of principiascientific.org. Scientists are continuing to discover more and more underwater volcanoes. And apparently they've discovered another 1,100 previously unmapped underwater volcanoes off the coast of Easter Island. And they are huge. They're like 1.5 miles above the seafloor. That is a big volcano. And they're pumping huge amounts of red-hot basalt, 2,200 degrees, into the water. It's not humans who are warming the oceans. It's geothermal. We'll be right back after station identification with the lovely Lady Claire. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User, this gorgeous creature sitting next to me is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to share our third hour on Friday with her unique perspective on the world. And so what is the first thing that you want to talk about?
Well, the first thing that I would like to talk about is another area of the war zones that just never seems to quit. The UN is reporting that Afghan civilian casualties from U.S. strikes is up 50%. And it's up 50% from last year, with increasing casualties not just from the U.S., but an increasingly aggressive Afghan Air Force. This should not be terribly surprising also, as the U.S. has been rapidly escalating the number of bombs on Afghanistan, reaching the highest level in nearly a decade. UN officials say most of the dead are women and children. The Afghan Defense Ministry issued a statement immediately condemning the UN report as false, insisting that it is quite obvious that the Taliban are killing more civilians, even though the specific report being addressed was on airstrikes. Taliban doesn't have an air force. And what is obvious to me here, Mike, is that we are not really targeting the alleged bad guys here, but creating a genocide against the Afghani people as a whole.
Same thing we're doing in Syria, same thing we're doing in Yemen.
Yeah. And what struck me, and I think that the writer of this article was very bold to accompany it with a photograph that was just absolutely grabbing. This came from Blacklisted News. And it showed about 10 or 12 dead Afghani children. Some of them were barely out of the toddler stage. Maybe 4, maybe 5 at best. And so this is the plan that's been crafted by those in the bowels of power in the occupied, unhinged surveillance states of America to allegedly win in Afghanistan.
Well, if we've killed everybody in the country, then obviously we've won the war.
Yeah. And it looks to me, though, Mike, and I am no military expert by any stretch, but it seems to me that the point of these bombings is even more radicalization of the guys who were left here to keep the war going perpetually, as we have heard President Trump state. War's good for business.
Now, this reminds me about what was going on in Vietnam, where that war was allowed to drag on because it was good for business. And there was sort of this scam going on called a suspected truck park, where they would send out these E-6 bombers to drop bombs on a suspected truck park, which turned out to be an empty field. And the goal there was just to grind up the munitions in order to go back to the American taxpayers and say, we need more of your money. We need more of these bombs. We can win in Vietnam, which turned out obviously not to be the case.
No.
But the goal was never really to win in Vietnam, but to just plunder the American people for the military-industrial complex.
There was a very disturbing incident that happened earlier this week. Henry Kissinger, everyone remember this guy?
Oh, yes.
Nobel Prize winner and war criminal all at the same time, just met with President Trump for the 3rd time, and it matters. It's a troubling indicator that something frightful could be headed our way. And CBS reported the meeting with Kissinger comes after the president has offered explosive foreign policy-related comments that has Washington waiting with bated breath. And last week, he alluded to the calm before the storm after a meeting with his military leaders, although there was no real clarity offered by the White House on this. And to those of you who are listening, I'm a little hoarse today. I'm sorry. I was yelling at singers last night, singing tenor.
Do you want to clear your throat?
Yes, for 1
Okay, all right. I'll keep talking so we don't have dead air. There we go. Okay, we're all.
Okay, hopefully. Well, the Shry is still in the voice.
All right.
And Mr. Trump, Mr. President, has also said that 25 years of diplomacy with the North Korean regime has failed, and only one thing will work: fueling speculation over military action. And we've got this incessant saber-rattling against North Korea. And he's also derailed the JCPOA. He has also planned and has designated Iran's core fighting forces as terrorist entities, which could see both the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and Hezbollah on the receiving end of U.S. missiles in Syria.
Well, he's already slapped sanctions all over them here.
Yeah.
Again, it is a very troubling indicator. But like I said earlier in the show, right now the federal government in Washington, D.C. is in a race to get a major war going before the economy implodes.
Yeah.
Because if the economy implodes and they don't have a war to blame it on, they don't have an enemy to blame it on, the American people are going to blame Wall Street and Washington, D.C. for the destroyed economy. And this is nothing new. The United States, every time it gets into a hideous economic mess, it gets into a world war to try and get out of it or at least distract from it. Crash of 1907, I think it was, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II, crash of 2008, and here we are on the brink. Now, we're going to do a quick little shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And getting on back to you, this idea of Trump saying diplomacy has failed. Well, diplomacy is supposed to be give and take.
Yeah, it's a two-way street.
It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Diplomacy isn't going into somebody else's country and say, you start doing what we tell you to do. That's not diplomacy. And nobody's going to respond positively to that. But that's basically what Trump is saying. We're going to go to war against North Korea or Iran or Russia or China because they won't do what the U.S. tells them to do.
Yeah. And I really wish, upon reading that President Trump met with Kissinger this last Wednesday, I wish with all my heart that these meetings would have been with people like President Jimmy Carter, who, by the way, has volunteered to go to Pyongyang to prevent war between the U.S. and North Korea, or Dennis Kucinich. There were things Kucinich did in his work that I really have respect for. I think he was and remains a man of peace. And I have a small note for Melania Trump, who I respect tremendously. Mrs. Trump, whatever room they met in, please get it sanitized, cleaned, have someone blow some sage around it. Kissinger, to me, is a man of pure evil. And to imagine that this guy is yet another presidential whisperer gives me the absolute creeps. And I am very concerned. My gut is telling me that something very, very wicked this way comes. I think first it will be some sort of action against North Korea, then Iran. My sense of timing is that North Korea will be the first on President Trump's to-do list militarily, and Iran will come secondly. I hope he understands that he cannot possibly expect to do both at the same time and win.
Well, here's the concern, okay? The 10th came and went. There was no North Korean ICBM. There was no North Korean nuke. Remember, they were trying to say, he's going to use a real nuke over the Pacific. Didn't happen. I think North Korea is just going to hold off and not do any more testing. And that means for the U.S. government to launch an attack against North Korea, and they've got all the assets there, there's going to be a false flag. The only question is what and where is it going to be? And that's making those of us who live here in Hawaii very nervous because it's arguable whether or not North Korea can really hit the U.S. mainland with all the problems they've had with the Taepodong 2. But they can definitely hit us, along with Guam and so forth and so on. The same thing with Iran. I mean, Iran is not in the habit of attacking other countries. They're going to have to be some kind of a false flag. The American people are not going to support yet another war on another country based on myths that they may have a nuclear weapon, or they may be doing this, or they may be doing that. We have been down that primrose path way too many times with Saddam's nukes and Assad's sarin gas.
Yeah.
And as I said before, the U.S. government is desperate to get these wars going as quickly as they can. And yes, they may think they can go into North Korea and Iran at the same time, because what they want is a world war. Because they're absolutely convinced that if they can get a world war going, we, the American people, are going to forget all about the corruption, all about the abuse, the loss of our civil liberties. We'll throw a snappy salute at the flag, and we'll fling our money and our babies onto the designated enemy's bayonets. I don't think it's going to happen. It's a very different, much more skeptical American population than was the case for big mistake number 1 and big mistake number 2.
Yeah, absolutely. There was something that kind of, raised the creep out factors when I read this. Apparently, Amazon and Walmart are looking at in-home and car delivery services, which will ultimately let police conduct warrantless searches in your home when you're not there. And recently, Walmart shocked privacy-conscious Americans by announcing they wanted customers to let Walmart employees inside their home. Walmart thinks Americans will be happy to let strange Uber and Lyft drivers inside their homes.
And that'll happen after that new ice skating rink opens in the dark regions.
Yeah. And their plan is users will place an order on Walmart's website for their groceries, which will dispatch a driver from Deliv, a Walmart-owned company that uses drivers on services like Uber and Lyft for the last mile, bringing it to your smart home. Homeowners will receive a notification that someone is in their home, a phone notification that it's happening, and if you want, you can watch the delivery in real time with your smartphone's home security camera system via the August app. You'll be in control of the experience the entire time.
No way.
The VP of E-commerce Strategy and Business Operations, Sloan Edelson, said, Mr. Edelson, what in the name of heaven are you thinking? Because will you be allowed to watch these deliveries when you're working, driving, knowing if your phone dies? The reasons this is a bad idea are too long to list, but hopefully he gets the idea. 2 days ago, Amazon shocked privacy-conscious Americans by announcing that they also want to deliver packages inside people's homes and cars. I mean, who wouldn't want to let two of the largest corporations in the world have access to your car and home? And I mean, what could possibly go wrong? And if you want to find out, you need to read Computer World's articles that describes how letting corporations in your home and car is one of the worst ideas ever. And among the things which can go wrong are obvious, like letting thieves delivery drivers case your home and your car. They could find out everything of value you have. Delivery drivers could easily plant drugs or weapons. And once a Walmart Amazon employee has been granted access to your home or car, all bets are off. And how long will it be before a delivery person maybe sees something suspicious and calls law enforcement in a customer's car or home and have it be searched? And the article ends with the phrase, if you think customer service bites now, just wait. It's about to get a whole lot worse.
Well, absolutely would never, ever agree to that. There's a lot of stuff in our home that people who don't know what it is would say, ooh, that looks suspicious. And I'll give you a good example, is the machine that we made to make our own nano silver.
Yeah. And
it involves chemistry ware. And somebody could look at that and say, oh, they must be running a drug lab. And we're not. We're home brewing our own nano silver. And I don't need somebody from Amazon or Walmart coming into my home, ignorant of science, just saying, ooh, I think this is bad. This is ridiculous. This is going to fail. This is going to fail miserably.
It's going to fail epically.
The only way it's going to work are for people who are not necessarily working, but people who are not mobile. Yeah. This will actually be of benefit to people who are housebound for medical or age-related reasons. It's probably going to work for them. But then these people will be at home when the delivery shows up. But as you said, criminals can go to work as these drivers and case the home, see where all the valuables are, then come back late at night and steal something. And I'll give you a real-world example that we discovered happens all over the country, and it happens here in Hawaii, and that is that car thieves, or thieves rather, not car thieves, thieves will go to work for the car rental agencies that primarily focus on renting cars to the tourists to our island. And something probably a lot of you don't realize is the cars that are bought by these rental companies, they're dual key. There's an individual key which is given to the driver who's renting the car, but there's a master key, one single key that will open up every single car in that fleet. So a criminal goes to work for the rental agency, does a really good job. At some point, he's allowed access to that key. He makes a copy. Then he quits, and from then on, every time he sees a rental car from this company, he can just go right on into it. And we actually, some years ago, we learned about this the hard way. We were up on the North Shore, and there was this Japanese couple with like a brand new baby.
Oh, the baby was just precious.
Oh, well, all babies are precious. And they'd been at the beach. They didn't speak any English. I speak just a tiny smattering of Japanese from my work at Square USA. And there was absolutely no sign on the car. It was locked up, and all their stuff was gone. Camera gear, passports. You know, and so, criminals will go to work for these companies and take advantage of the situation.
And what was so striking to me, we called their hotel, we explained their situation, we got them a place where they could go and reapply for their visas so they could get back home.
Yes.
And at the end of all of this, the dad of the little child hugged me and said thank you.
And that's a very unusual expression of emotion for somebody from Japan.
And I was touched and overwhelmed, and I was sad for them, but I was very glad that we were there and we were able to be proactive and help them.
Because without a passport, not speaking the language, it was a mess. I mean, their vacation was destroyed. And they're dealing with all this with a brand new baby. It really was sad. Anyway, getting on back to the real news here.
Okay, something that should be good news for the Middle East, but is not being allowed to. Fatah and Hamas have agreed to form a Palestinian unity government after years of deadlock, which saw the Fatah party of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas, which controls Gaza, fail to reach any accord. The two parties have today signed a unity agreement in Cairo. This is a big thing, or should be a big thing.
Well, it is a big thing, and Israel is just going to scream, because for decades Israel has played this little game of funding an opposition government in the Palestinian territories, so that they can play this little game saying, we don't know who's in charge, therefore who are we supposed to have peace talks with? We're not going to have peace talks. When Yasser Arafat and the PLO were there, believe it or not, Hamas was started by Israel's Shin Bet surface for this express purpose of interfering with PLO and having this little two government. We don't know who's in charge. Then when Arafat was assassinated, Hamas all of a sudden woke up and realized they were the government. And then as soon as that happened, all of a sudden Abbas shows up, and again, the speculation is that he was working for Israel, again, to keep the country divided under two rival governments. But if they're now signing this unity government, Israel's going to be in a panic.
Oh, I will tell you a little bit about the degree, the panic. The excrement has hit the ventilation shaft in Israel with this deal.
Okay, tell us.
Earlier this year, Hamas amended its charter, notably severing ties with the Muslim Brotherhood, illegal in Egypt, Syria, and elsewhere, while acquiescing to Fatah's platform since the 1990s to accept a Palestinian state based on pre-1967 borders. Previously, Hamas argued for a restoration of Palestine from the Red Sea to the River Jordan, as Fatah did prior to signing the Oslo Accords in 1993. There is only one minor problem. Israel's Netanyahu has dismissed this unity government out of hand and said it will not recognize it, DOA. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has lashed out against the reconciliation deal reached between rival Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, claiming that peace between Israel and Palestinians will now be much harder to achieve. Well, the people making it harder to achieve are the people in Tel Aviv.
Yes.
And he had the hubris to say, there is nothing we want more than peace with all our neighbors, but reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas makes this peace much more difficult to achieve.
All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And for those of you listening on BAM User, you could probably tell by this last commercial break, we're still having difficulties with Skype.
Yep.
And Down Detector is saying they're still having problems all over the place. Maybe they misconfigured the cloud. I don't know. I don't really care. I just find it very, very angering that Microsoft took it upon themselves to force us to upload the new improved Skype, and it's an absolute unmitigated disaster. In fact, it's sort of the Windows 10 version of Skype. Mm-hmm. And I think, Mike, we're going to have to start looking at an alternative system because Skype is just completely unreliable at this point. Yeah. Anyway, getting back to you.
Well, I'd like to talk about these horrific wildfires that are roaring through Northern California. They have been characterized as among the most destructive fire events in U.S. history. And it could be the absolute worst wildfire season in the history of the state of California. The fires have hit 250 square miles, and more than 3,500 homes and businesses have already been destroyed.
Including 15 wineries.
Yeah.
Don't cry.
The official death toll has risen to 21, but that's expected to rise dramatically because we have 600 missing persons reports that have been filed with the authorities, and the worst damage has been done in Napa and Sonoma counties. And there were some very difficult for me to watch photos of this. And unfortunately, the crisis is far from over. In fact, the National Weather Service has just issued a pair of red flag warnings. The weather forecast is just not looking great for those living in wine country and for those firefighters trying to get a handle on the 22 fires raging through Northern California, which broke out on Sunday and are barely contained more than 3 days later. The red flag warning for the North and East Bays started at 5 p.m. Wednesday and midnight on Thursday, respectively. That means that winds can gust from 20 to 50 miles an hour in the higher elevation areas, fanning the flames down mountains and into the cities. So as bad as things are, it looks like they may be getting worse.
And I'm sure right now they're looking for somebody to blame for all this. Oh, it's a terror attack by ISIS, because they don't want to admit the reason these fires got out of control is the funds to maintain those fire break roads, to keep them open, were cut back so that the U.S. government could buy more bombs and bullets. Remember the other day they said, we're running out of bombs. You know, governing is choosing. Governing is prioritizing. Yep. Bombs are much more important than keeping your home from burning down.
Yeah.
And but again, it's bad management is what's going on here. Whether it's the fire break roads or the leaking water mains or the leaking aqueduct, they have allowed this country to decay into ruin in their quest to try and build a new global empire at the point of a gun.
Yeah, and this is being characterized by the California Fire Chief Ken Pimlott as serious, critical, and catastrophic. And it's going to take a while to get out and comb through it. And this, of course, comes on the heels of several other major disasters. We've been dealing with hurricanes, Harvey, Hurricane Irma, and the Las Vegas shooting. And it looks like the U.S. hasn't seen a large stretch of so many disastrous events such as this in a very long time.
Well, leaving out the Las Vegas shooting, which we think was a gun grabber false flag, for those who believe that there's an imaginary playmate in the sky that directs all things, I think it's very obvious that he, she, it, or they are not very happy with the United States going around the world violating thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's property, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, it looks very much like that, some degree of punishment. And I remember Pastor Colleen Chun, who you know I very much respected, and we talked about the war agenda under previous administrations. And she said to me a lot of years ago, Claire, this country's going to get punished one way or the other.
Well, it sure looks like she was right here. We're going to take a phone call now from James in Tokyo. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Actually, James, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to take you through the commercial break. I didn't look at the clock. So stay on the line. I'm going to come back to you as soon as we finish these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And James in Tokyo, now we can have our little conversation. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I hope I can talk to the lovely harp-playing angel, Claire, today.
She's right here.
Very special time when she's here. Hi, Claire.
Hi.
I hope you're well.
Oh, yes.
Before I begin, I just want to ask you, I sent you about 1,123 marriage proposals, and I was wondering if you received them.
Oh, so it's you. It's you. Boy, I'm coming to get you. No, she's spoken for. I'm sorry.
Yes. I mean, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the day we met last May. And I'm sure that there has to be a wonderful, marvelous, intelligent, sensitive, compassionate lady out there for you with a lot of horse sense.
Failing that, how much is it worth to you for me to clone her? Send in the clones.
Anything.
There have to be clones.
I figured he threw that away faster than Harvey Weinstein's pants fell down. But anyway,
yes.
What I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask you was, I wanted more of you to hear your comments on something. I had a really bad feeling when I heard Trump speak out against eliminating the agreement.
Yes.
Out of spirit with Iran. And,
whatever that means.
Really upset me, and it gave me a really bad feeling. I mean, I hate to think, like, although I live in Japan, I'm American, I love America, but, I don't blame Kim in North Korea for trying to develop weapons. I mean, if Trump takes this route, how could you possibly even conduct diplomacy with America if they're not going to keep any agreements? I wanted to hear your opinion on that.
Well, that's just the point. That's just the point. If, people are going to look around the world at what happened with Iran and say, how in the world and why should we negotiate with this country, which seems to be pathologically incapable of keeping its promises? And that is a real difficulty for this country henceforward. I agree with you.
And it's not just Iran. I mean, they did the same thing in Libya.
Yep.
Give up your nuclear weapon program. We promise we won't invade you. Then they invaded. The same thing with Iraq. Give up your chemical weapons. We promise we won't invade you. Then they invaded. Same thing in Syria. Give up your sarin gas. We promise not to invade. They invaded. And now they're going to do the same thing with Iran.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm in Japan, and you're in Hawaii.
Yeah.
But I got to tell you, I actually kind of feel safer that North Korea has a nuclear weapon than if they didn't.
Well, that would certainly be safe for the North Koreans, but again, as I said earlier in the program, my concern is it looks to me like Washington, D.C. is desperate to move this war agenda forward, and with North Korea seeming to be holding off any more nuclear or missile tests, that means there's going to have to be a false flag somewhere.
Yeah.
And just like us here in Hawaii, sadly, you there in Japan, you're within range of a potential false flag.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anyway, both of you have a great weekend, and nice talking to you, Mike and Claire.
Well, thank you very much for the phone call.
Good speaking with you, too.
And getting on back to the Weinstein situation, apparently they're now going to kick him out of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. So this thing is definitely not over, and it is a big stink, and it is going to harm the industry. Okay, but again, the industry has to bear responsibility for that. For not dealing with the situation in a timely manner. And we've got all these people coming forward saying, I'm sorry, I didn't say anything when it happened. I was afraid for my career, which I understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. But at the same time, when you go along protecting a Jimmy Savile or Harvey Weinstein or David Begelman, sooner or later it's going to blow up in your face.
Yep.
There's going to be so many people who are so angry at the way they're being treated. And we're talking about over 20 years of this kind of abusive behavior. There's a lot of people still out there ready to come forward. No question about that.
Yeah, I would agree. I would like to go to a very interesting court case that is demonstrating that the FBI, the Flubbing Bureau of
Idiots.
Yes, thank you, was behind the 2015 ISIS terror attack in Texas.
Ooh, imagine my shock.
Yeah, right, hello. We're still supporting ISIS all over the world, even in the Philippines, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And while questions remain as to whether the Federal Bureau of Investigation had prior knowledge of the Las Vegas shooting, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, the victim of another terrorist attack on U.S. soil is speaking out and attempting to hold the FBI accountable for the suffering he endured. In May 2015, 2 men opened fire outside of a provocative Dra Muhammad event in Garland, Texas. While the suspects were ultimately the only casualties, the attack is notable in that it became the first ISIS-claimed attack on American soil. It is also noticeable because of the close proximity between an FBI agent and one of the suspects, both before and during the attack. Bruce Joyner, a security guard who was shot and wounded after Elton Simpson and Nadir Sufi opened fire outside the event, is now suing the FBI for $8 million. He has filed a lawsuit claiming that FBI agents solicited, encouraged, directed, and aided members of ISIS in planning and carrying out the May 3 attack. Now, as the Washington Examiner noted, if Joyner does not reach a settlement with the Bureau, the case could shake loose hundreds of documents from both local and federal officials about what happened that day, and could answer the question as to why an FBI agent was in a car directly behind the attackers and did nothing as the events unfolded. Simpson gained the FBI's attention a few years before the attack as a Muslim who they saw as vulnerable to radicalization. In fact, FBI agents were reportedly monitoring him in the weeks leading up to the attack, and there was even an agent in a car following him to the scene, which did absolutely nothing to prevent the crime. Now, according to a report from CBS News, court records reveal that the FBI agent who was in the car directly behind Simpson and Sufi during the attack had texted Simpson just weeks before with the message, "Tear up Texas," and he was even taking pictures of the car about 30 seconds before the first shots were fired. As soon as the suspects opened fire, the agent fled the scene. As the Free Thought Project reported, both local law enforcement and the FBI did not respond to warnings from a woman connected to Anonymous who cautioned that there was going to be an ISIS-inspired attack at the event just days before it happened. And the FBI helped the terrorists obtain a weapon that was used in the attack by lifting a hold during a background check, incited the terrorists to attack the Garland event, and even sent an agent to accompany the terrorists as they carried out the attack, the lawsuit states, according to a report from the Washington Examiner. The lawsuit also calls out former FBI Director James Comey. Now, where have we heard that name recently? Claiming that he worked to cover up the Bureau's prior knowledge of the threat posed by Simpson. In the aftermath of the attack, former FBI Director James Comey lied to the American people by claiming that Simpson was a needle in a haystack and was invisible to them. Even after it had come to light that an undercover FBI agent had been communicating extensively with the terrorists during the week prior to the event and had accompanied them as they had carried out the attack, the FBI continued to assert that there was no advance knowledge of a plot to attack the cartoon drawing contest. Now, what is going to happen? The issues alleged in this lawsuit could be explosive if the FBI is forced to acknowledge and respond, because in addition to the accusation that the Bureau's agents encouraged and directed the attack, the claim that agents lifted a hold during a background check in order to help Simpson and Sufi get the firearms they used, it's incredibly important. And it's a reminder that even if gun control measures requiring strict background checks become law, the FBI has the power to bypass them in order to service the agenda, which is not exactly an agenda at this moment that I can tell, that is to protect and serve the American people.
No, it really isn't. And again, This is hardly an isolated incident.
Yeah.
There have been dozens and dozens of these cases where the headlines will proclaim terror attack, we've arrested the terrorists, and then the case will go to court, and it'll come on out that these so-called terror attacks were being engineered by the FBI using their undercover informants. And 3 to 6 months down the road, the judges will throw the cases out as obvious entrapment, and the media won't even report that.
Yeah.
So again, it's all fakery and fraud, and it's a reminder that yes, a lot of these so-called terror incidents, mass shooting incidents, they're manufactured propaganda to get the American people to go along with what the U.S. government wants, whether it's the gun grabber agenda, being afraid of ISIS, even as the U.S. government is aiding and abetting ISIS in Syria, and I would not be surprised if they try and blame those wildfires in California on ISIS, because you've got everybody over there in Syria, Russia, they're saying the U.S. is helping ISIS. And the U.S. needs to convince the American people, we would never help them. They're the bad guys. And so there's going to be something that's going to happen to remind us all that ISIS are the bad guys, and we shouldn't listen to anybody who says the U.S. government is aiding and abetting them.
Yeah. And I would like to turn my attention for a moment to social media. And, wow, talk about bitter and petty. Clinton aides are now ganging up on boyfriend of Harvey Weinstein accuser. Weinstein. Current and former aides to Hillary Clinton ganged up on Anthony Bourdain on Twitter after Bourdain criticized Clinton for her delayed response to the sexual harassment allegations against Harvey Weinstein. Clinton received criticism for initially staying silent after the New York Times reported last week that several women had accused Weinstein, the powerful Hollywood producer and Democratic megadonor, of sexual harassment, assault, and even rape. The New Yorker subsequently published a story detailing how the Italian actress Ambra Battaglia Gutierrez staged a sting operation with the police during which she secretly recorded Weinstein admitting he groped her and that he does so to other women often. Weinstein has donated thousands of dollars to Clinton throughout her political career. He maxed out donations to Clinton's failed 2016 presidential campaign and gave more than $30,000 to the Hillary Victory Fund, a joint fundraising committee between Clinton's campaign, the Democratic National Committee, and more than 30 state Democratic parties.
The Victory Fund, there was a waste of money.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, the nerve, the crust. I believe this Italian actress, if she said that Weinstein did what he did to her, I believe her.
Well, it's been a hallmark of the feminist agenda that women who are victims of sexual assault, should just be believed at face value. Even Hillary used that in her campaign last year, except, of course, for that trailer trash white sluts who had accused Bill Clinton of doing this kind of stuff.
Yes.
And again, it isn't that there's one or two allegations. This is a tsunami of allegations that are coming on, and it's destroyed the Weinstein Company. They've just lost their fifth member of the board.
Yep.
And even Fox News was running the story about how Weinstein's 2015 contract renewal literally had a clause that said, yeah, go ahead and assault women, but you're going to have to pay all the settlements, and we will charge you a fine every time that you do. And apparently the fine was $150,000 for the first incident, and it ramped up from there. But Weinstein had enough money where he could just go on doing what he was doing, so it was an ineffective situation. And again, I got to be honest, I'm enjoying the heck out of this. And I'm certainly enjoying the fact that the liberal political takeover of Hollywood is getting a black eye out of this, because you had all these so-called liberals and champions of women's rights, and now you find out they were Weinstein's enablers. George Clooney is having a lot to answer for.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Good old George. This may end his talk about running for the White House.
Yeah.
And again, it's hypocrisy. And I really have had a problem all along with Hollywood celebrities thinking that they're knowledgeable enough to be politicians and political observers. And yes, I worked in Hollywood many, many years ago, but I have spent 22 years learning this craft. I'm not just somebody who takes a minute in between takes to walk out to a microphone and just say, well, I think blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And NBC right now is having to deal with the reality that the reporter who broke this story to the New York Times works for NBC. And he took the story there first, and they said, no, we can't do this. Mm-hmm. Weinstein, we can't do this. And he took it over to the New York Times. And to their credit, they did run the story.
Yeah.
They did run the story, and maybe they ran it because they're desperate to get their readership back. Mm-hmm. And that's a sizzling story. They probably sold a lot of copies with that one.
I would like to go to something that might be a little hopeful in terms of the House of Representatives. Apparently, the House leadership's attempts to undermine the bipartisan House Concurrent Resolution 81, which would end U.S. involvement in the Saudi war, is failing. On Wednesday, the House unanimously agreed to delay the vote on the resolution to November 2nd, and it directs President Trump to end all military participation in the Saudi war in Yemen immediately, pointing out that Congress has never authorized such an operation. Congress has sole discretion to make such a determination, and in over 2 years of war in Yemen, there's never been a vote. And while a lot of America's ongoing wars at present are not authorized under the War Powers Act, Yemen is a particularly glaring one because there isn't even a roundabout argument to be made to try to connect this to the vague AUMF on fighting al-Qaeda. Indeed, in fighting against the Shiite Houthis in Yemen, the Saudi-led war has greatly enhanced al-Qaeda's power in the country.
Well, I'm glad to see that Congress is stretching their muscles on this one because that authorization for the use of military force, first of all, it was unconstitutional to begin with.
Yeah.
Because only Congress can declare a war. And it was never supposed to be a carte blanche, open-ended hunting license for several presidents, few presidents, to just go on out and start killing people all over the planet.
It wasn't supposed to be a blank check, and I hope that this bill is passed when it's presented on the 2nd of November. Right now, to our listeners and viewers, we are colluding with Saudi war crimes in Yemen. And the images of assassinated children dying of malnutrition and cholera, which has proven to be really horrific, those images stay with me.
They do. All right, we've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program and a phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, last segment of our program today. And before we go to the phones here, just watching the corporate media, they're back to pushing this thing about how Cuba was using sonic weapons on our diplomats. This will not stand. So, like I said, they're desperate to get a major war going. And it looks like basically the U.S. is a dying empire. And my concern is they're going to take everybody else with them.
Yeah.
And Claire was saying she hopes they don't think they can go into North Korea and Iran at the same time. They may be getting ready to do North Korea and Iran and Cuba and who knows what all else, because none of this is making any sense.
And you know what I was thinking about as I was putting together my talking points? Remember the film Wreck-It Ralph?
Yes.
When it comes to geopolitical world issues, unfortunately right now, I'm afraid, we have a Wreck-It Donald in the White House.
Unfortunately we do. He's listening to his presidential whisperers.
Yeah.
And they all love war. War, it's fantastic. All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Larry in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, that's Lenny in L.A., Mike, but I appreciate it. Listen, in regards to something you alluded to before you went to commercial, and you were saying that you wouldn't be surprised if they tried to blame the fires in Northern California on ISIS. Yeah. Well, I can already tell you that it's already in the works, be it the alternative media, i.e. the alternative propagandists, the ones who have sold their souls for 30 pieces of silver, and I will name them. Jeff Rentz was saying that ISIS was behind the Vegas thing, okay, and Alex Jones is saying that ISIS is behind the Northern California fires, or they could be behind the Northern California fires. I don't know how you got there, but I just want to back your play.
Well, I'm sorry to see so many people in the independent media either drinking the Kool-Aid or, let's be blunt, selling out.
Yeah.
It is a dark time indeed. Anyway, Lenny, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're almost at the end of the program. You had one more story you wanted to share with us.
One more. Russia may be sending more Iskander missiles to Kaliningrad after the U.S. moving missiles right on the border.
Well, they moved in troops to within 100 miles.
Yeah. And Russia may send more Iskander tactical missiles to its Kaliningrad enclave in response to the latest U.S. action in the Baltics. The RIA news agency cited the head of the lower house of Parliament's Defense Committee, Vladimir Shamanov, on Thursday.
And the Iskander can carry nuclear warheads. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, the U.S. putting those troops near the Russian border is a violation of the Russian NATO agreement that limits the number of troops either side can put along those borders.
Yeah.
And so once again, the world is getting an object lesson that you simply cannot trust the U.S. government to keep any promises or agreements. And this is going to drive countries away from the United States. They can't do business here. They're afraid of hitting sanctions. This is going to drive more of the world into the Russian-Chinese sphere of influence. Mm-hmm. Everything the U.S. government is doing right now is ham-fisted, stupid, and flat-out wrong. And it's going to, unfortunately, end in a world war that the United States, I fear, is going to lose.
Yeah, it's very dark out there.
It is very dark, given the lack of training and discipline that we're seeing in the naval forces and so forth and so on. It's ugly. All right, there's the music. Time for us to get out of here. Claire and I are going to go play Harvey Weinstein, an aspiring actress. And the rest of you have a really good weekend. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller, and we'll be back on Monday here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Have a good weekend. Aloha, America.